Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome back to Live Chats with Progress Virginia. I'm Anna Scholl. I'm the executive director here, and I am super excited today to have a fantastic panel of amazing women to talk all about Amendment 1. If you haven't yet gotten your ballot, then you may not have seen that there are two constitutional amendments that are on your ballot this year, in addition to voting for president and Congress and local races and Senate. Amendment 1 on the ballot is about redistricting. And it is a proposed constitutional amendment to set up a
Anna.
Oh, I've been talking on mute. Hey, everybody, we're going to do that
again. Time.
Oh, hello and welcome to 2020. I'm Anna Scholl. I'm the executive director here at Progress Virginia. And we are just all living that 2020 life right now.
We wish we would have muted some of what was going on last night, but we won't go there.
Oh my goodness. Well, we are going to be much more civil and thoughtful with actual facts and ideas today, because we are talking about Amendment 1, which is one of the constitutional amendments on your ballot. If you haven't gone to get your ballot yet this year, if you haven't voted early or requested your ballot, then you may not have seen that in addition to voting for president and Senate and Congress, there's a couple of constitutional amendments on your ballot as well. And Amendment 1 deals with redistricting. The proposed language would set up a redistricting commission. And that may sound great, but we are here to talk about why there are some flies in the ointment, and why we at Progress Virginia and the amazing women who are joining us today would like to encourage you to vote no. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce the amazing women who are joining us today. Delegate Lashresce Aird from the 63rd District, Monica Hutchinson, a community activist from the Richmond area, and Tierra Ward, who is the executive director of Fair Districts, the grassroots organization working to educate voters about why you should vote no on Amendment 1. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks so much for having us.
So we are just going to go ahead and dive in. And I'd love to start with you, Tierra. And before we sort of dive into what the amendment does and what it doesn't do, why should we even care about redistricting? Why is this so important that we are taking the time to talk about it today, and to put so much energy into this amendment?
Well, again, thank you for having me today. Excited to be here in the company of such great women. And I think it's really simple. When we're talking about politicians and leaders, I think the people should actually be responsible for picking their politicians and not the other way around. And so with this redistricting and the gerrymandering, that won't be the case. We'll have politicians being able to pick and choose the people and the districts, and we just can't have that happen. This is America. This is a country where we are able to decide how things go. We are a democracy, and we want to keep it that way. So that's pretty straightforward.
So, Monica, I know you've been passionate about and working on voting issues and democracy reform and redistricting for a long time. When it comes to Virginia's track record with creating voting districts, what's the history here?
It is a horrible history here. Seriously, Virginia has been gerrymandering the maps going all the way back to the 1700s. So this isn't new. Trying to make sure that they're drawing lines to protect power is nothing new, and also cutting out minorities is nothing new. Communities of color, especially within the Black community, trying to dilute our voice, our power. Once again, it's just not new. So yeah, no, Virginia has a horrible track record. We just had to have special redistricting just last year. This is an issue. It legit is an issue. So,
well, and Monica, you correct me if I'm wrong, but you live in a district that was the sort of technical wonky word is racially gerrymandered, right? Where Black voters were packed into a district to try to dilute voting power elsewhere.
Yes, I live in the 74th district, and the neighboring district is the 72nd district, which is noticeably less diverse. So, you know, and honestly, when the special redistricting happened, we were wondering what they were gonna do, if they were going to pull us out or what, right? Like, you know, going back and forth like a yo-yo is what it seems. But so yeah, I definitely live in a district that I am personally invested in this. It's not okay to continuously draw Black voters in and out of districts based on what the elected officials want, right? And if they want their races to be easier, then of course they want more Black voters and to dilute our voice. So yep.
Thank you for sharing.
District.
So one of the words that you probably have heard a lot already and that you're going to hear us say a few more times this afternoon is gerrymandering. And if you're not familiar with the word, what gerrymandering means is when political district boundaries are drawn most of the time by politicians in order to rig a particular outcome. So, you know, when we talk about why we think people should vote no on Amendment 1, and when supporters talk about why they think you should vote yes, we all actually have the same goal, which is that we want to end gerrymandering. So Delegate Aird, can you tell us a little bit about this proposed amendment that's on the ballot, what it does and what the problems are?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's also incredible to participate with these ladies who are extremely passionate about representation. And I feel like I just want to add a bit more context to what's at stake here. We watched last night as a country, two individuals who want to be the leaders of our free world. And if you are not reminded of anything, it's representation, and the people who want to represent you, represent your interests, and try and ensure that, you know, you are top of mind for them when they are making their decisions. And ultimately, that is what redistricting boils down to. It boils down to the type of representation that you can and should have. There's one fundamental question here at stake, and that is who you believe should be determining your representation. Now, if you believe that your representation should be determined by you, the voter, as an individual, as a citizen, you can stop right there and oppose this amendment, because essentially this amendment does not allow for that. If you read this amendment in its entirety, this amendment will allow for legislators to control the process, choose your representation for you from start to finish. Now, let's just talk about the core structure that this amendment would allow for, which is the establishment of a 16-member panel. But that's really what they want you to believe, because it's not really. It's really 4 party bosses, then picking everyone else and outweighing their power and deciding the way the rest of this is going to go. So it says a 16-member panel, but it's really not truly. The way the amendment would work for the 16-member commission, half citizens, half legislators, but you have 4 party bosses that will choose the actual makeup of the commission. And not only that, but there is a process where, to get into the weeds a little bit, 4 retired judges are selected by those party leaders. The judges are selected, and then they get together and pick the 5th judge that is represented. And then ultimately, you have this panel where you now think you have, this balance between legislative and citizen participation. But when it gets down to actually voting on the maps, it would only take 2 members of this commission from the same party to decide, you know what, I'm not in agreement with this map. So let's do this in simple math form. That's 14 people who say, yes, I'm in agreement, but only 2 can then say we are in disagreement, and then that map drawing process is kicked to the Supreme Court. We're going to talk a little bit about this a little more in the conversation, but there are a number of problems with there being such a low threshold to kicking this process over to the Supreme Court. And you might think that was done purposefully or intentionally. I don't know, but that's kind of what I think. And that's done for a reason, and we'll discuss that. But ultimately, just going full circle back to the point at hand, this amendment does not allow for the citizens to truly have the power to pick their representation. It is a legislative controlled process. And the worst part about it all is that it would be cemented in our Constitution. That is made permanent. That is cannot undo. And I say that with such confidence, because if you look at our history, tell me when there has been something to come out of the Constitution that has gone in. There is a process, but it just has not happened in our history. And so to think that we would hand over all of our powers to a group of legislators that would control this process is just not what any of us said we wanted when we determined we wanted to see redistricting reform.
That's such a great point. Thank you for laying that out. I think, what I take away from that is that far from being independent, the amendment actually cements the control of a handful of politicians, right? The 8 politicians on the commission, and then their 8 handpicked friends who are going to draw these maps. Unfortunately, that control by politicians and party leaders is not actually the only thing that people are concerned about in this amendment. Like we talked about a minute ago, Virginia has a history of discriminating against Black and brown Virginians, not just in redistricting, but in redistricting as well, in relevance to this conversation. And political maps have been repeatedly struck down by the courts for being racist, for discriminating against Black and brown Virginians. So Monica, from that perspective, what does this amendment say about and to communities of color, and what should it say?
So, yeah, there is nothing that explicitly protects communities of color. There's nothing in this amendment that would also protect just Virginia as a whole, right? Because as Delegate Aird had just mentioned, that it's going to be, 8 legislators, 4 from leadership. There's nothing stopping Northern Virginia from having all the power here in Virginia. That's not okay either, because we know that Virginia is a very diverse state. And so just having all of the power, all of those who would be drawing the lines only in Northern Virginia, and not protecting the interests of any other parts of the state, Hampton Roads, Central Virginia, Southwestern Virginia, that's just not okay. That is not representative of the whole either. And so there needs to be explicit language protecting that. It has to be explicit language protecting communities of color, protecting interests, communities that have shared interests, protecting the geography of Virginia, and just ensuring that everybody has a voice in this process. Because 4 people is not okay. So like going from 140 to just a handful, like that's just not okay with me. I don't feel very represented, and no matter what the intentions are, I always tell people, intent versus impact. If the impact is a negative one, it will always far outweigh your intentions, no matter how good they were. And I definitely think that this amendment may have had good intentions in the beginning, but it's not good at all, because like I said, the Black community, communities of color, we have no protections. We have no guarantee that we will have a voice at this table to ensure that the interests of the Black community, of communities of color, are protected. There's also no protections. There's no explicit language protecting gender. There's nothing that says you can't have an all male panel. So, once again, you asked me about Virginia's history. I mean, let's be honest, Virginia has a history of having white males, in charge here in Virginia. So there's nothing in this language that would prevent that again. And that's not the direction that we're trying to go. That's not where we want to go. We're saying that we want Virginia to reflect Virginia, and this amendment does not reflect Virginia. This amendment does not protect Virginia.
Thanks, Monica, for laying that out. I think to sort of follow up on that, I want to go actually back to Delegate Aird for a second, because one of the things that you hear from supporters of the amendment is that there are civil rights protections in the amendment. And I think there's some disagreement from the folks in this conversation about the truthfulness of that statement. And I'd love for you to break down for us, what is in the amendment and what is not.
Yes, Monica laid a beautiful foundation for, the reason that Black and Brown communities really are at risk with this amendment of representation. There is sort of a reference in this amendment to sort of trying to make it even appear as though the Black and Brown communities are protected with this, but it's just not so. Number one, what this amendment does is basic referral to what we all know is that we must adhere to federal law, right? With references to the 14th Amendment and the Voting Rights Act. But let's be also very clear that if we look at the Voting Rights Act initially, we know that number one, the Voting Rights Act is at risk. We have not had the Voting Rights Act reauthorized in some time. In fact, it pains me and it pains so many others to think that, we lost a leader, a civil rights leader in this country who was fighting up to the moment to ensure that the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized. John Lewis's life work was towards fighting and making sure that we had absolute guarantee that the Voting Rights Act would be there and would be held strong. But that just simply was not the case. And so this reference to the Voting Rights Act, this vote to the Voting Rights Act, is just disingenuous. And I like to credit my colleague, Delegate Price, for making this reference, which I feel needs to be repeated. The discrimination that Black communities have faced in this country occurred with the 14th Amendment in place. And so to think that that reference alone is enough to ensure that we will be protected is not, it's just not accurate. This amendment does not explicitly lay out the protections that we should be able to depend on. And unless the words are there and I'm just missing them, this amendment does not go far enough for the reasons that Monica mentioned. Number one, there is nothing to say that a Black or Brown person can be or has to be present as part of the Citizen Commission when the maps are being drawn. There is nothing to say what we have in 1255, which is the prohibition of racial, political, and prison gerrymandering. Those protections are not there. So unless that language is explicitly laid out, I consider this amendment to be silent on the protection of Black and Brown communities. And to me, that is just not good enough.
Thank you for laying that out, Delegate Aird, and making that really explicit. Tierra, so what happens if the amendment passes this November? What should Virginians expect then in 2021 when it comes to redistricting? What could that look like?
Well, I will say what Virginians can expect is for the power to be taken out of their hands. They will no longer be in the process. What it's going to do is give partisans the ability to veto any plan and then send it to a Senate-approved Supreme Court. And at that point, we're leaving it up to, again, politicians to make the decisions. We're no longer letting the people decide how their communities will be represented. So it's the bill, like Delegate Aird and Monica are saying, a lot of it is complicated, but when we start getting to the simplicity of it, the people are taken out of the process, and that's just not how it should be. We should have a say on how our districts are drawn, and voting yes on the amendment does not do that.
And I wanted to stay on this for a second, because I think, one of the things that people, think when they hear some of the promotion around the amendment is citizens are going to be involved, and this means I'm going to have a voice. If I'm a citizen who wants to be on the redistricting commission, how do I get on?
You're selected by a politician. So it's not a random luck of the draw. It's not you're the most dedicated voter and you have awareness of the issues. It's, hi, I'm this person. I know you share my interests. You want our district to look this way, the same way that I do. Let me put you on this committee. So it is literally one favor for another. It's not a system that is sustainable that includes the people.
So I need to start sucking up to Speaker Fillercorn or Todd Gilbert or something like that if I want on the commission as
at this moment, you should be messaging Todd Gilbert and saying, hey, let me be on the committee.
I don't think that's going to work out for me very well, but I'll keep it in mind. Delegate Aird, one of the other criticisms of the constitutional amendment has been the role of the Virginia Supreme Court and how prominent a role it could potentially play in the process. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that role would be and why it's a problem?
Absolutely. You know, Virginia is one of only 2 states in the country where the courts are selected entirely by the legislature. You know, earlier I discussed the very manipulative process in which those 2 members can kick this map drawing process over to the Supreme Court. You know, in addition to that process being questionable within itself, just think about if the Supreme Court draws the lines. You know, they'll decide their own jurisdiction and there are no guardrails or constraints as to how or what approach the Supreme Court uses in the way they draw those lines. And for any citizen, that should be concerning because you don't vote for the judges. You vote for your state representatives, but ultimately you have no power or authority over what those judges do. And so we're supposed to just trust, which I can tell you as a Black woman, that's asking a lot of me, that my interests are going to be represented, that the wherewithal and understanding of the needs of my community is going to be known. And quite frankly, that's just, I think that is unrealistic to ask of the Supreme Court. I think the worst part about the involvement with the Supreme Court is that it doesn't prohibit gerrymandering. And if gerrymandering occurs, there is no action that can be taken to appeal and or take additional recourse to dispute the maps that would be proposed. What are you going to do? Are you going to sue the Supreme Court? Where exactly can you go to get recourse if a map is presented that doesn't reflect our community of interest, that blatantly politically gerrymanders, and it doesn't represent the districts that we would want to see as Virginians? And so I think the fact that there is nothing in this constitutional amendment that makes it very, very clear how and from what approach these Supreme Court members would take in drawing the districts, and no prohibition, plain explicit prohibition against gerrymandering, it's problematic and it's counter to the purpose of redistricting reform.
So just to be extra special, super clear, if the rules and provisions and protections are, like, if you don't see them in the constitutional amendment, then it's not something the Supreme Court has to follow if they draw the lines. Is that right?
That is exactly right. And so a lot of supporters, they make you think that this is what they would do, or they ask you to trust because it's the Supreme Court, trust that they are going to do these things. But a judge is known to follow the language that is there in front of them, their guardrails, their constraints. But if they are not there, how can you tell them they cannot do it?
So Monica, I want to come back to you to talk a little bit more about what the real impacts are when maps are drawn that don't give people a fair voice. Because I know, we talked a little bit about voting and voting rights earlier, but the impact of redistricts actually goes beyond that. And you are such a fierce advocate for families and children and economic justice. And I think the list of things is very long of what you advocate for. How are all the things on that list impacted when voters don't actually get to choose their representatives?
So not only do voters not to get to choose their representatives, but voters also, there's no sort of accountability at all, right? Because once you pack us into certain districts, then you dilute us so much in surrounding districts that we have no voice, like we just don't have any political power. So therefore, we don't have to get the attention. You know, our elected officials don't have to listen to us. They don't have to actually pay attention to us whatsoever. So, you know, when it comes to accountability, there is none. For, you know, I also live in Senate District 12. You know, I think we make up roughly about 5 to 6%. Black people make about 5 to 6% of this district. That is a very, very low number. So therefore, my state senator doesn't have to listen, and she doesn't listen. She does not listen to us at all. Our interests are not protected when it comes to fighting for the issues that I care deeply about, that I know the Black community cares deeply about, that other communities of color care deeply about. There's no level of accountability. Our voice is taken away completely. So it's not just voting, it's not just getting people elected, you know, and making sure that we do have more electeds that look like us. Yes, that is something that we need, right? Like, we know representation matters, but I don't always have to be represented by a Black legislator for my legislator to listen to me, right? Like, I shouldn't only feel heard and valued by our Black legislators. That's not okay. I should be, you know, heard. I should feel valued by all legislators, but especially the ones that represent me and my family. But once again, if we have no political power, if we have no power to elect you or to vote you out, then why would you pay attention to us? So therefore, if we don't pay attention to us, then I know our interests are not being, it's not being worked on either. So, you know, that is a huge problem for me. Huge issue.
It is a huge issue. I mean, if the only way legislators are accountable is that they are accountable to the politicians who are drawing their districts, right? That doesn't make for a representative and reflective democracy in government. It just makes for a hyper-partisan situation, right? Where, you know, politicians are only responsive to their party leadership because they're the ones who hold the power to make them lose their seats.
Right. And I just wanted to just add, because I know Delegate Aird mentioned prison gerrymandering earlier, which is in Delegate Price's bill. But some people don't know what prison gerrymandering is. And, you know, when we talk about not having a voice, this is it right here, right? Like, we know Virginia takes away the rights to vote from people who are serving time for a felony. We know this, right? Restoration of rights. Like, we've been working on this issue. But what a lot of people don't know is that when the lines are drawn, they are counted as part of the population of where they are, whatever facility they are located in. Not where they live, not their address, but where they are. They don't, like, they can't vote. They can't vote because Virginia took that right to vote. So they can't vote. They have no, you know, they have no kind of accountability from their elected official. But they love to say, well, I have X number of Black constituents. But what you're not saying is that those Black constituents don't have the right to vote. So like, there's no level of accountability to them whatsoever. And that's not by mistake either, right? Like, no, that's not by mistake. It was, I mean, we know this was very intentional. So, you know, when we talk about not having a voice, I just want to make sure that I mention that, because that is an issue and it needs to be corrected. It's not okay.
I think that's a really great point, Monica, and I think leads into sort of the next thing we were going to talk about. So just to be really clear, House Bill 1255 that passed this past session and was patroned by Delegate Marcia Price, explicitly bans prison gerrymandering, right? And requires that for redistricting, people who are currently incarcerated and therefore can't vote be counted when it comes to redistricting in the community that they're going to return to, right? Where they're a part of that community, where they're going to have their rights restored and be a member of the place that they live and where their family and their friends are, not in the place where they're incarcerated, where they can't vote and they don't have a voice. 1255 actually does a lot of really good things. And I think this might be a good place to sort of pause and talk about that for a second. Delegate Aird, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of the list of things that are in that bill and why it's important?
Yeah, and if I might, I don't want to jump the gun a bit, but I think this legislation is critical, not just because of the way it explicitly prohibits racial gerrymandering, political gerrymandering and prison gerrymandering, but it says a lot about, number one, the intent of legislators and what you can expect of us if this amendment fails, which I think we'll talk a little bit about later. But I had my district struck down in 2019 as a result of racial gerrymandering, which is the packing of Black people into a particular district. And when my district was struck down and the lines were redrawn, I saw the true voting strength and power of what a district should be like. And when we prohibit that explicitly, it makes a great deal of difference in the type of districts that we have, which is a lot of what Monica explained. You know, a lot of the supporters of this amendment, they will regularly refer to the fact that, well, we're doing all of these things, and they'll say it, but you really can't point to it in the amendments. A perfect amendment would be taking the language from House Bill 1255 and embedding that into the Constitution to make it absolutely sure that no matter what type of gerrymandering you are talking about, it is plainly clear that it is prohibited and that it's not allowed. And I think that I want to make it clear that as a legislator, that is the commitment that I make, that will be one of the first things we will do when we restart the process to get a real fair redistricting reform constitutional amendment in the works. And I think voters should not settle for anything less than that.
Thank you for laying that out. I think so much of the redistricting conversation tends to focus on who draws the lines, right? Is it the legislature? Is it a commission? Is it a commission of politicians and their friends? But what gets lost in that conversation is how the lines are drawn, what rules have to be followed, what the criteria are for those districts to make sure that they represent voters' interests. So Tierra, keeping in mind sort of what we've just learned about what legislation the General Assembly has passed, if voters vote no on Amendment 1 this November, what does that mean for redistricting in 2021? Does that mean that Democrats who currently control the legislature are just free to do whatever they want and draw maps that are good for Democrats and nobody else?
So while enshrining a bad plan in the Constitution is like the worst option, there have been multiple bills that would prohibit the gerrymandering on different grounds, those that would govern it. Any long-term fix should have meaningful input from the communities of color and the communities of the Commonwealth. The idea that a constitutional amendment is better is like a falsehood that's being perpetrated, like put out there. And so it doesn't actually help us having parties get to draw the lines.
And if the amendment does fail and the General Assembly draws the lines in 2021, don't they still have to follow the law that they passed this year that says they can't politically gerrymander and they can't racially gerrymander and they can't prison gerrymander?
No, they don't actually. But wait a minute.
If I can jump in, I think, and if I understand what you're asking, you know, I think we spent a lot of time talking about the how, as you just referenced, making sure our districts are compact and contiguous, are, you know, considerate of communities of interest, and that really we're trying to draw lines that are representative of the Commonwealth. Now, House Bill 1255 is state law. That's not going to change. It went into effect on July 1. And if this amendment fails, we will be bound by House Bill 1255. And so this great fear that, oh, the process doesn't change, legislators will still be drawing the lines. But the difference is they will be bound by House Bill 1255, which prohibits gerrymandering, which is ultimately the problem we've had with legislators drawing the lines in the past. But to be clear, during the 2020 session, Delegate Price also introduced House Bill 1256, which was the WHO. So a lot of times we get fixated on this conversation because of this amendment specifically and its flaws with legislators drawing the lines. But House Bill 1256 would have established a true independent commission. And I guarantee you, if this amendment fails, I can take this check to the bank and cash it, that Delegate Price will be back with more legislation to establish a independent commission that is truly nonpartisan, that is truly just of citizens. And it takes legislators out of the equation altogether. And so this fear that if the amendment fails, everything will continue to be the same, it's just not true. It's already different. And it takes just one bill, which every Democrat supported during the 2020 session, but every Republican did not. And that should tell you something as well, to show that we are committed. We can be trusted to go back and get this right. And that will be different in what we would have in the 2021 process from what we've had in the past.
Got it.
Great answer. Thank you for clarifying that for me. A lot of things to take in, and since you are a savvy delegate, you are deeper in the bill than I can ever be.
So Tierra, Fair Districts, which is the organization that you run, has been building grassroots power to educate voters about the amendment and urge folks to vote no. Can you talk a little bit about what folks can do besides voting and voting no on the amendment to help out with this effort?
Well, I'll start with this amendment in April, in early April, before we ever existed, before this group of like great people came together, was going to get passed they had a support of about 60%. And in the short window that we've gotten this off the ground, we've seen their support dwindle down to now in the 40%. And with every day, every new poll that comes out from different publications, we're seeing it drop less and less. And so how we've been able to cut through that is to do grassroots organizing type things, just building momentum online with supporters, actually having conversations with voters, actually talking to the people and not letting a huge machine of money and out-of-state funds and oil tycoons dictate how Virginia would be ran. We've been letting the people have the conversation and getting more information. And as the facts have been trickling in, the support has been dwindling down. So we have been asking people to make donations at fairdistrictsva.com. We are asking you to join us on this Sunday night. We have another informational panel where we're going to answer questions and give more facts and shed more light on this, because we don't want people to go into the voting booths since we're already in voting season. We don't want you going in there not knowing what you're voting yes or no on. And we want to give a clear picture of what voting no means. So we're passing out information. We have some flyers floating around, but we're doing a huge push on digital. And as many of you know, today is the deadline for any donations for this quarter. So please be sure to click on our, I think someone can put that in a little chat box, the fairdistrictsva.com. Make sure you're donating, and you will continue to see us online. We're building our momentum bit by bit, and before you know it, we're going to make sure this doesn't pass.
So we'll put both the link to Fair District's website in the comments on Facebook, and then we'll also put in the information to sign up for Sunday's information session as well. So you can hear more from Delegate Aird and all the brilliant things she has to say, as well as, I think, Delegate Price, Delegate Marcus Simon, and Delegate Mark Levine as well.
Yes.
Delegate Aird, Monica, is there more you want to say about ways people can get involved, what they can be doing now to advocate against this constitutional amendment and educate voters about what's really on their ballot?
So I will just follow up with what Tierra has said, that just, getting out here and actually talking with people, explaining it to people, right? Not just telling people how to vote or just telling people to vote no, but actually explaining to people what the amendment says and what the amendment would and would not do. Um, that is the best thing to do. And I just want to add that people, you know, those who have been working on this for a few years haven't actually come into the communities that are most directly impacted in a negative way by racial gerrymandering. I mean, that was very intentional, right? Like, I'm not, you know, you didn't, you know, if you're not actually explaining to the people who are most directly impacted what's going on, how to be heard, then you're causing more harm to my community. And so, yeah, I'm not going to play nice about that at all. And I don't think it's, you know, I don't think it's a coincidence either. We all know that Republicans, the party of Trump, supports Amendment 1, but does not support 1255, 1256, right? Like, when there is language that explicitly protects communities of color's interest, when there is language that explicitly prohibits racial gerrymandering, they are against that, but they support the amendment. So you can't have it both ways, right? Because if you truly, truly felt that Amendment 1 did the same thing, then you would support both. So it doesn't make any sense whatsoever to me. And so, like I said, it's not a coincidence that those who are strongly against Amendment 1 also very much support Delegate Price's bills. That, as Delegate Aird said, is state law. So, you know, it's not a coincidence that those who are actually focused on equity, focused on building independent political power within Black community, within communities of color, we are against this trash amendment. Like, there's just no nice way to put that. And at the end of the day, when you put my community in harm's way, then the gloves come off. Because my obligation, my allegiance will always be to the Black community above all else, right? It's not about me. It's not about elected officials. It is about my community and ensuring that my community is building, like I said, that independent political power to make sure that we are getting the things that we need, that we are getting true equity, we are getting true justice, true equality. We cannot have those things if you're not even hearing us. You know, if you dilute us, if you're not hearing our voices, if you're not ensuring that people are empowered to do so. So when we hear people say, like, what's the point? You know, politicians don't listen, they don't care. No, legit, some don't listen and some don't care because they don't have to. They've never had to, and they intentionally drew the lines so that way they didn't have to listen to us. And you know, I know people say, oh, it's bipartisan, whatever. But I'm sorry, but the party that did this, the party that gerrymandered to begin with, I am not going to trust them to actually do something to fix it. They are the ones who put us in this situation. So they don't care. They've shown they don't care. They've elected judges for how many decades now? Of course they love it. Because no matter what can happen, no matter if the power in the state legislature was to flip, which it won't, I'm just going to throw that out there. But if it was to flip, they know that they still got their ace of the hole because they have the judges because they appointed majority. So it's not, once again, it's not a coincidence that they know, oh, okay, yeah, okay, so the maps are gone, the judges get to draw them. There's no safeguard, there's no accountability, there's no way for us to do anything whatsoever. So sorry, like seriously, I do. Sorry.
Well, go off, Monica. that's the real, right? That's the program. Nothing more to be said.
That's the passion we need everyone to have when talking about this. I love it.
I really don't feel like there is much more for me to say after, you know, hearing Monica's passion. I'm just a few snaps here. I felt every bit of that in my soul and in my spirit. And I just hope those who are watching really understand that that is how serious this amendment is, that they really truly understand that literally that is what we have at stake. And I will just say my last few words in echoing what has been said, ending where I started, which is that this amendment is about representation. Whether or not you are in a rural community and you're wondering, is someone from a rural community going to be a part of this commission? The people drawing the lines going to take in the unique needs of, you know, a rural community, the Black community, are those communities of interest, or, you know, language minorities, all of the above, whatever type of representation you want to see, will it be considered? Will it be represented? And the fact that that is a question should leave you with concern. As a legislator, I can say with great clarity, I do not want to draw the lines. I do not want to control this process. I do not want to have a seat at the table. But unfortunately, this constitutional amendment would cement that into our most precious document, our Constitution, and leave it so in perpetuity. So what can be done? We have heard over and over on this call that when voters hear the truth about what this amendment is, they are with us. This is such an uncertain period, with people voting by mail, some voting in person, some waiting until election day. We have so much work to do to make sure that every single voter knows the truth about this amendment. And so if you have time, please volunteer to go work at your polls right now up until election day, your registrar's office, and let people know about the truth with this amendment. Call your friends, call your neighbors, call anybody whose number you have that's going to be voting in this election in Virginia, and let them know about the truth of this amendment. This is a grassroots movement. We don't have $1 million in our coffers to push out mail, to pay people to knock on doors, and to deliberately mislead you with propaganda, if you will. But what we know is we have truth on our side, we have passion, and we are going to be on the right side of this issue. So please join us in this fight, and please help us get the word out. There's so much at stake this election, and this is equally part of that.
Well, I don't think there's any more to be said. You all really, I think, made the case for why Amendment 1 is going to be harmful to our communities if it passes, what people should know, and why you should vote no on Amendment 1. If you have more questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll drop a link in the comments as well, so you can read the amendment for yourself. If you have questions about what somebody is saying to you, the best resource is always going to be to go read it for yourself and see if that language is actually there in the amendment. I want to close just with a couple of reminders, because we are now in the midst of election season. Virginians are voting right now, which is super exciting. Voting makes me so happy. Here's what you need to know to make sure that your vote counts this election. If you are not registered to vote, or if you need to update your voter registration, the deadline is October 13th. You have 2 more weeks to register to vote or to get your registration updated. You have until October 23rd to request your ballot to vote early remotely at home. There have been so many changes to laws in Virginia this year to make voting more accessible. So it's so important to know that voters have options when it comes to participating in this election. You can vote early by mail. You can go vote early in person. You can request your ballot online and return it to a drop box at your registrar's office, or you can vote in person on election day. Choose the option that is best for you. Remember, if you're going out to do something in person, to take your mask and your hand sanitizer to be safe and healthy out there. So again, the deadlines are register to vote by October 13th. If you want to vote from home, vote by mail, you need to request your ballot by October 23rd. And you can vote early in person at your early voting location. You'll go online to your registrar's office to find it all the way through Halloween. An election this year is on November 3rd. So we hope you guys get out there and vote, take a couple of friends with you, and don't forget to vote no on Amendment 1.